The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has caused a political stir this week after he told his congregation that the United Kingdom has a duty as a, quote, Christian country to not subtract our responsibilities during this Easter sermon. The Archbishop said that the serious ethical questions over sending asylum seekers abroad cannot stand the judgment of God. Well, was this too political for the head of the established Church of England to be wading in on? Joining us now to discuss this further is Tim Dieppe, head of public policy at Christian Concern. Welcome to the programme. Should the Archbishop of Canterbury be getting involved in such political issues?
Yeah, Tom, so I find myself quite often wishing that the Archbishop of Canterbury would speak more clearly the Christian message and the uniqueness of the Christian message. But of course, the Christian message does include saying that some things are wrong and that we all need forgiveness for those things. So I quite often wish he would speak out more clearly on some of the other moral issues of our day, like transgenderism or abortion or sexual morality and various issues like that. Certainly he has a right to speak out on political issues because all political issues at the end of the day are moral issues. And so he has a right to speak out on this. Whether I agree with him or not, I'm not sure because, I have some sympathy with Priti Patel saying, well, what is your alternative, Justin Welby? Here's our plan. We think it will save lives. We think it will reduce child migrants, which means saving lives, and enable us to focus on the more genuine asylum seekers. And both of those, saving lives and focusing on asylum seekers, are Christian moral imperatives. So I wonder with Priti Patel what Justin Welby's alternative is, but certainly I think he has a right to speak out on the political and moral issues of our day. And the question for the nation is, where do we get our moral values from if we're not getting it from Christianity?
Is there a problem here in that Justin Welby is head of the established church, of the state religion, and that to some extent that carries a greater responsibility to speak not quite for the country, but certainly with the country? It might be easier to see the heads of non-established churches wading into political issues and contentious matters of the day. Does the Church of England specifically carry a special responsibility here?
Yes, it does. But, it's not a state church. It's an established church, not a state church, but a slight difference there. And that means it certainly has the right to criticise government policy when he thinks that it's wrong. And I think that's fair enough. He has the right to do that, and people can choose to listen or not. He doesn't have an authority to say, you must not do this and cannot do this. But he can say, I think this is against what God would do. Like many others, I'm questioning, well, what is the alternative then? The current plan obviously isn't working and is causing a risk to lots of people, and meaning we're not focusing on proper asylum seekers. So the government's tried to come up with another plan. I'm not convinced that is the right plan either. But I think we should be hesitant to criticise it without coming up with some alternative. At least the government's come up with a plan that it thinks will work. But, Welby's totally within his rights to step in and try and bring a moral dimension and try and say, let's look at what the Christian moral values are in this. And I'm pleased that he's doing it in that sense, even while I'm not sure that I agree entirely with his position.
I'm fascinated by how the Church of England is behaving on issues like this compared to, for example, the more religious politics that we might see in the United States of America. It seems that religion has not always played a large role in our politics in the United Kingdom, but perhaps by virtue of having an established church. Is there a bit of an inverse relationship to what we might see in the United States of America? Is religious politics a greater purview of those on the left in the United Kingdom and on the right in the United States?
The left and the right in the United States. Maybe. Certainly there's religious traditions on both sides, on both the left and the right, I think, in Britain. And both of them are trying to bring Christian, or were historically trying to bring Christian morality to bear on the issues of the day. Certainly we're a less polarised society in America, although going more polarised, it seems to me, in terms of the right and the left. And I hope we don't become as polarised as America is. Certainly, I think that the established church, perhaps has meant that we've had, in some ways, less religious involvement in politics and a kind of odd way like that. And whereas in America, where there's a very clear separation of church and state that people always look to, that does mean that the churches themselves have to fend for themselves. There's no support from the government there, and therefore perhaps they're more courageous and speak out more boldly about the gospel and about moral imperatives. And I wish the church did have a stronger voice in that sense, but I'd rather we spoke out more boldly about the uniqueness of Christianity and some of the other moral pressing issues of the day as well.
Famously, Tony Blair said, or is supposed to have said, we don't do God when it comes to politics in this country. Should party leaders be doing God in the way that, for example, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer both posted Easter messages yesterday?
Well, I suppose the question back to that is should Christians or Muslims or others have to keep their faith private and avoid mentioning it and avoid saying where they get their moral values from? Actually, wouldn't it be better if we did explain where we got our moral values from and explain what we're motivated by and why we think what's right and why we think what's wrong? And isn't that a good thing for the country to say, I believe I'm doing this because in conscience I think this is right, I think this is what the Bible says, or I think this is what the Jewish scriptures say, or what the Islamic scriptures say, or whatever, and then we're all clear, and then we know who we're voting for, and then we know what we're getting. So I want to resist this attempt to sort of privatize religion and say that religion has no role in politics, because surely religion does have a role in politics, and those who are religious ought to be able to be open about it and explain it and say it, and not sort of shy away and say God's got nothing to do with it. If there's a God, clearly he speaks into the moral issues of the day, and let's appeal to that as well. And also, if there's no God, then we've got no moral authority to appeal to say, hang on a minute, the state's wrong about this. Surely we must be able to appeal to God in order to criticize the state. Otherwise, we've got no external authority to appeal to about it.
Well, it's a fascinating issue and one that we don't often talk about at the forefront of our politics. But Tim, thank you so much for joining us and talking through those issues there for us now. Thank you for joining us here on The Briefing.